Monitors beeped in the dead of night, the only sound breaking the cold silence of VIP room 402. Avery adjusted her scrubs, her heavy frame aching after 12 hours of bathing a ruthless cartel leader. He hadn't moved in 6 months, until tonight, when a scarred hand violently clamped around her wrist. Avery Gallagher was used to being invisible. At 310 pounds, she knew exactly how the world saw her, a barrier to navigate around in the grocery store aisle, a punchline for cruel teenagers, and in the clinical hallways of St. Jude's Medical Center, the designated workhorse. The other nurses, slim, pretty, and perpetually exhausted by anything outside of charting, gladly piled the heavy lifting onto Avery. They whispered about her diet, mocked the squeak of her thick orthopedic shoes, and left her with the most difficult assignments. None was more difficult than the patient in room 402. Lorenzo Moretti was a ghost story whispered in the hospital cafeteria. 34 years old head of the Moretti crime syndicate, and lying in a persistent vegetative state after a rival family ambushed him at a downtown warehouse. He had taken 3 bullets, 1 to the shoulder, 1 to the gut, and 1 that grazed his skull, causing severe brain swelling. For 6 months, he had been trapped in a deep coma. Outside his door, 2 men in tailored suits stood guard 24 hours a day. Carmine, a towering brute with a broken nose, and Dante, a quiet man whose eyes never stopped scanning the corridor. The hospital staff was terrified of them. The other nurses, like Jessica, refused to enter the room without a security guard rushing through Lorenzo's basic care with trembling hands and thinly veiled disgust. Avery was different. She wasn't afraid of the men in the suits, and she certainly wasn't afraid of Lorenzo. "Evening, Carmine," Avery said gently, shifting her weight as she approached the heavy oak door of the VIP suite. Her thighs chafed under her oversized blue scrubs, a dull, familiar sting she ignored out of habit. Carmine grunted, stepping aside. "He had a fever earlier, Pen. Doc says it broke, but keep an eye on it." "I always do," she replied, offering a soft, round smile. Stepping into the dimly lit room, the scent of antiseptic and expensive cologne filled the air. Lorenzo lay on the bed, a network of tubes keeping his formidable body alive. Even in a coma, he was an intimidating figure. Intricate tattoos crawled up his muscular arms, a raven on his forearm, a bleeding rose on his chest. His face was sharp, aristocratic, framed by dark hair that Avery painstakingly washed and combed every 3 days. "All right, Mr. Moretti," Avery murmured, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. "Time to get you moved. Can't have the boss of the city getting bed sores on my watch, can we?" Her voice was a soft, melodic hum in the quiet room. She believed deep down that comatose patients could hear. It was a conviction that earned her eye rolls from the attending physicians, but Avery didn't care. She talked to Lorenzo every single night. She told him about the terrible hospital coffee, the weather outside, and sometimes in her weakest moments of loneliness about her own life. She leaned over the bed, her broad chest heaving slightly with the exertion. Rolling a man of Lorenzo's size required immense physical strength. She braced her heavy legs against the bed frame, wedging her knees to anchor herself, and expertly shifted him onto his side to tuck a wedge pillow behind his back. "You're losing muscle mass," she noted quietly, taking his large, calloused hand and beginning a slow, methodical massage to stimulate his atrophied nerves. "I know you're a dangerous man out there. I've seen the news. But in here, you're just Lorenzo. And you need to fight. You can't just lay here and let the world forget you." As she massaged his arms, Avery's mind drifted to her own insecurities. She caught her reflection in the dark window pane. A round face, double chin hair, pulled back into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She felt a familiar pang of self-loathing. Who was she to tell anyone to fight? She had given up fighting her own battles years ago, resigning herself to a life of solitude, food as comfort, and the grueling satisfaction of nursing. She retrieved a warm basin of water and a sponge. Carefully, reverently, she began to clean his skin. She washed the sweat from his brow, navigating the scar tissue on his abdomen with infinite gentleness. She applied a high-grade moisturizer she had bought with her own money. The hospital lotion was cheap and dried out his skin. "You know," Avery whispered, dipping the sponge, "Jessica says I'm crazy for treating you like a human being. She says you ordered a hit on a judge last year. I don't know if that's true. But when I look at you, I just see a broken clock. All the gears are there, Mr. Moretti. You just need someone to wind you back up." For a fraction of a second, Avery thought she saw his eyelid flutter. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at his face, holding her breath. Nothing. The rhythmic hiss-click of the ventilator continued. She sighed a heavy rattling sound and finished her tasks. She didn't know that deep within the dark, suffocating void of Lorenzo's comatose mind, a tether was forming. For months, Lorenzo had been trapped in a sensory nightmare, drowning in an endless black sea. But every night, a warm, soft touch would pull him to the surface. A gentle, melodic voice was the only light in his darkness. He didn't know who she was, but her voice had become his religion, the only thing keeping his fragmented mind from shattering completely. The storm hit at 3:00 a.m. the following Tuesday. Thunder rattled the thick glass of the hospital windows, masking the usual sounds of the ward. Avery was in the middle of her shift, sitting in the plush armchair next to Lorenzo's bed, reading aloud from a worn paperback copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. All human wisdom is contained in these two words, wait and hope. She read, her voice steady and rhythmic. The door clicked open. Avery paused, glancing up. It wasn't Carmine or Dante. It was a doctor she didn't recognize. He wore a standard white coat, a surgical mask obscuring the lower half of his face, and a stethoscope draped around his neck. "Excuse me," the doctor said, his voice muffled. "I need to check his central line. We're seeing some irregularities on the central monitor at the nurses' station." Avery frowned, her thick eyebrows drawing together. She glanced at the monitor above Lorenzo's bed. The vitals were perfectly stable. Furthermore, Dr. Evans, the only physician cleared by the Moretti family to enter this room, was currently out of state at a medical conference. Any other doctor was supposed to be escorted by Carmine. "Where's Carmine?" Avery asked, closing her book and standing up. Despite her massive size, she moved with a sudden protective swiftness. "He stepped away to take a call," the doctor replied smoothly, stepping closer to the bed and pulling a syringe from his pocket. The fluid inside was clear, but the needle was entirely too large for a simple flush. "I just need to push this saline." Avery's heart dropped into her stomach. Protocol dictated that no medication was pushed without a chart review, and the man hadn't even looked at Lorenzo's clipboard. Her instincts, honed by years of surviving a cruel world, screamed at her. "Stop," Avery commanded, stepping between the doctor and Lorenzo's bed. "You cannot administer anything without Dr. Evans's direct authorization. Step away from the patient." The man's eyes hardened. The friendly medical facade vanished, replaced by a cold, lethal glare. "Move aside, fatty. This doesn't concern you." The insult, one that normally would have made Avery shrink into herself in shame, did the exact opposite. A fierce maternal rage ignited in her chest. This was her patient. The assassin lunged forward, trying to bypass her, to jam the syringe into Lorenzo's IV line. Avery didn't think. She reacted. She threw her entire 300-pound frame into the man's path. The collision was violent. The assassin, though muscular and trained, was completely unprepared for the sheer density and momentum of the nurse. Avery slammed into him shoulder first. The impact knocked the wind out of him, sending him crashing backward into the medical cart. Stainless steel trays and glass vials shattered across the linoleum floor with a deafening crash. "Carmine!" Avery screamed at the top of her lungs, grabbing a heavy metal IV pole. The assassin scrambled to his feet, a feral snarl escaping his lips. He realized he couldn't get to the IV line, so he pulled a suppressed handgun from his waistband. Avery didn't retreat. Trembling with terror, tears blurring her vision, she swung the heavy metal pole like a baseball bat, striking the man's wrist just as he fired. The bullet went wide, shattering the window and letting the roaring wind and rain into the room. The assassin backhanded her viciously. The blow caught Avery across the jaw, sending her sprawling to the floor. Pain exploded in her face, tasting of copper and salt. She gasped, struggling to push her heavy body up off the slick linoleum. The assassin stepped over her, raising the gun toward Lorenzo's head. "No," Avery shrieked, grabbing the man's ankle and ripping it backward with all the strength she possessed. He fell hard, his chin cracking against the edge of the bed frame. Before he could recover, the heavy oak door was kicked off its hinges. Carmine and Dante stormed in, guns drawn. In 2 seconds, Carmine had his boot on the assassin's throat, pressing down until a sickening crunch echoed in the room. Avery sat on the floor, her chest heaving, blood pouring from her split lip, staining her blue scrubs. She was hyperventilating, the adrenaline crashing and leaving her dizzy. Then a sound cut through the chaos. It wasn't the thunder or the cursing of the guards. It was the frantic, panicked beeping of the heart monitor. Avery forced herself up, ignoring the throbbing in her face, and rushed to the bedside. Lorenzo's body was thrashing. The violent commotion, the gunshot, the shatter of glass, it had acted as a brutal defibrillator to his dormant brain. His eyes, dark and wild, snapped open. He gasped a horrific choking sound as he fought against the ventilator tube down his throat. His hands, previously limp and lifeless, clenched into fists. He began tearing at his IV lines, blind panic overtaking him. "Hold him down, he'll rip out his arterial line," Avery yelled to Dante, who rushed forward. But Lorenzo, fueled by months of caged adrenaline, backhanded the guard with astonishing force. He was disoriented, trapped in a waking nightmare, lashing out at everything. Avery didn't care about the danger. She threw herself over his chest, using her substantial weight to pin his torso to the mattress, keeping him from thrashing off the bed. "Lorenzo, stop!" she cried, grabbing his wrists. His grip was like iron, his long nails digging into her flesh, but she held on. She leaned down, bringing her face inches from his, forcing him to look at her. "Lorenzo, look at me. Look at me," she pleaded, dropping her voice into that same soft, melodic hum she used every single night. "You are safe. You are in the hospital. I am Avery. I am your nurse." Lorenzo's wild, panicked eyes locked onto hers. His chest heaved against her soft, heavy breasts. He struggled for another moment, his grip on her wrists tightening to the point of bruising. But then, as he stared into her tear-filled eyes, as the scent of her cheap vanilla soap cut through the smell of blood and rain, he stopped. He knew that voice. It was the anchor that had kept him from drifting into the abyss. It was the warmth that had chased away the freezing dark. His breathing slowed. His grip on her wrists loosened, shifting from a violent hold to a desperate, clinging grasp. He stared at her, taking in her round face, her bleeding lip, her messy hair. To Lorenzo, who had spent a lifetime surrounded by plastic, superficial beauty and treacherous loyalty, she looked like an absolute goddess. Avery gently reached up and hit the call button for the respiratory team. "He's awake," she whispered, her tears falling onto his hospital gown. We need to extubate. 20 minutes later, the tube was out. The room was swarming with doctors, but Carmine had pushed them all back, creating a perimeter around the bed. Lorenzo's throat was raw, his voice a gravelly rasp. He refused to let the doctors examine him until they backed away. His dark eyes scoured the room, frantic and dangerous, until they landed on Avery. She was standing in the corner, holding an ice pack to her swelling jaw, trying to make herself as small as possible, a habit she fell back into whenever she felt vulnerable. Lorenzo lifted a trembling, heavily tattooed arm and pointed a single finger directly at her. "You!" He rasped, the sound like grinding stones. Avery froze, lowering the ice pack. "Me!" Carmine stepped aside, allowing Avery to approach the bed. She walked slowly, suddenly acutely aware of how she must look. Sweaty, massive, bleeding, and disheveled. She kept her eyes downcast. "You saved me," Lorenzo whispered, his gaze burning into her face, mapping every curve, every flaw, every beautiful imperfection. "The man with the gun. You fought him." I was just doing my job, Mr. Moretti." She stammered, her cheeks burning with heat. "Your voice." He continued, ignoring her modesty. His hand shot out weakly but firmly, wrapping around her thick wrist again. His thumb stroked the skin he had bruised earlier. "You talked to me about the Count of Monte Cristo, about the rain." Avery gasped softly. "You heard me." "I heard everything," he murmured, his eyes darkening with an emotion Avery couldn't quite decipher. It looked dangerously like possession. "You touched me like I was a man, not a monster, not a corpse." Dr. Evans, who had just rushed in from the airport, tried to intervene. "Mr. Moretti, please, you need rest. Nurse Gallagher, step away so we can—" "Shut up!" Lorenzo snapped, not breaking eye contact with Avery. The authority in his hoarse voice silenced the entire room instantly. He pulled Avery slightly closer. She had to brace her hands on the mattress to avoid crushing him. "When I leave this hospital," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave, a promise wrapped in steel. "You are coming with me." Avery's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Excuse me, sir. I am a staff nurse here at St. Jude's. I can't just—" "Carmine," Lorenzo called out, his eyes never leaving Avery's trembling lips. "Yeah, boss. By the hospital," Lorenzo ordered effortlessly. "And tell them Avery Gallagher is no longer their employee. She works for me now." Avery's jaw dropped. She tried to pull her hand away, but Lorenzo, despite his weakened state, refused to let go. For the first time in her life, Avery wasn't invisible. She was the absolute center of a very dangerous man's universe. Morning sunlight pierced the heavily tinted windows of the armored SUV, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the tense air. Avery sat rigidly against the plush leather seats, her thick fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her oversized civilian clothes. True to his terrifying promise, Lorenzo Moretti had not remained at St. Jude's Medical Center. Within 48 hours of waking up, he orchestrated a mass exodus, transferring his entire medical setup to his heavily fortified compound in upstate New York. He explicitly demanded that Avery accompany him, effectively making her his exclusive, highly paid private nurse. The sheer wealth and power on display were staggering, echoing the real-life operations of the infamous Gambino family during their peak, but Lorenzo operated with a modern clinical precision that left no room for error. Stepping out of the vehicle, Avery stared in awe at the sprawling estate. It was a massive stone fortress surrounded by wrought iron gates, security cameras, and armed patrols. She felt entirely out of place. Her worn orthopedic shoes squeaked against the pristine marble floors of the foyer, and her heavy frame felt cumbersome beneath the scrutinizing gaze of Lorenzo's domestic staff. Lorenzo was wheeled in behind her by Dante. Despite the wheelchair and the lingering pallor of his skin, Lorenzo exuded a lethal authority that commanded instant submission from everyone in the room. His dark eyes, sharp and calculating, immediately sought out Avery. "Carmine, show Avery to her suite." Lorenzo rasped his voice, still recovering from the trauma of intubation. "It is adjacent to mine. No one bothers her. She answers only to me." Avery's new room was larger than her entire apartment. It featured a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet filled with custom-ordered scrubs and high-end plus-size clothing, and a luxurious bathroom. Yet despite the opulence, she felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Her insecurities roared to life. She was a 310-pound nurse from a working-class neighborhood. She did not belong in a mansion surrounded by Mafia elites. Over the next few weeks, a strange routine developed. Lorenzo's physical rehabilitation was grueling. His muscles had atrophied during his 6-month coma, and every movement brought him immense pain. But he refused to let anyone but Avery assist him. During their daily therapy sessions, Avery guided him through resistance exercises. She would stand before him, offering her broad shoulders for him to lean on as he practiced standing. "You need to distribute your weight evenly, Lorenzo," Avery instructed, her voice dropping into the soft melodic tone that had anchored him in the dark. He leaned heavily against her, his large hands gripping her thick waist. While other men might have found her size repulsive, Lorenzo used it as a lifeline. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in her scent of vanilla and antiseptic. "You are strong, Avery," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. "You hold me up when the rest of the world wants me to fall." "I am just doing my job," she replied, her cheeks flushing deep red. She tried to step back, but his grip tightened. "Stop doing that," he commanded softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Stop diminishing your worth. You think I do not see the way you look at yourself in the mirrors? You think I do not notice how you try to shrink into the background?" Avery swallowed hard, tears pricking her eyes. "Lorenzo, look at me. I am fat. I am clumsy. I am not like the women in your world." "No, you are not," Lorenzo agreed firmly, his hands sliding up her back. "The women in my world are vipers wrapped in silk. They are empty. You saved my life. You stood between a loaded gun and my head, armed with nothing but a metal pole. You have a heart of absolute iron, Avery. You are the most beautiful creature I have ever seen." His words struck her like a physical blow. No one had ever spoken to her with such raw, unfiltered admiration. For the first time in her life, her size was not a liability. It was a testament to her strength, her warmth, and her unwavering presence. However, not everyone in the compound shared Lorenzo's perspective. Enter Bianca. Bianca was the daughter of a prominent underboss within the Moretti syndicate. She was tall, razor-thin, and possessed a cruel beauty that intimidated everyone around her. Bianca had long positioned herself as Lorenzo's future wife, viewing his coma as a temporary delay to her ascension to power. Avery's sudden, highly favored presence infuriated her. One afternoon, while Lorenzo was resting, Avery went to the kitchen to prepare his specialized high-protein meals. Bianca was leaning against the marble counter, sipping an espresso and eyeing Avery with blatant disgust. "I don't understand his obsession with you," Bianca sneered, looking Avery up and down. "You look like a farm animal in scrubs. Are you sure you aren't eating half of his rations? It certainly looks like it." Avery froze, the familiar sting of humiliation burning her throat. Her instinct was to apologize, to scurry away, and hide in her room. But then she remembered the weight of Lorenzo's hands on her waist, the absolute certainty in his voice when he called her beautiful. Before Avery could formulate a response, The sound of a cane striking the floorboards echoed through the hallway. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, supported by Dante. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Bianca," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly quiet. Bianca instantly paled, her haughty demeanor crumbling. "Lorenzo, I was just making a joke." "Pack your bags," Lorenzo ordered, limping forward. "You are leaving this estate. If I ever hear you speak to Avery in that tone again, if I even catch you looking in her direction, I will have Carmine cut out your tongue." "Lorenzo, you can't be serious," Bianca shrieked, panic setting in. "My father is your top earner. You are humiliating our family for this whale." Lorenzo didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply nodded at Dante. In a flash, Dante had Bianca pinned against the counter, a cold steel blade resting flush against her throat. "Your father earns what I allow him to earn," Lorenzo whispered, stepping close to Bianca and staring into her terrified eyes. "And this whale is the only reason I am breathing. She is untouchable. Disrespecting her is a direct attack on me. Get out of my house." Dante released her, and Bianca scrambled away, sobbing in terror. Lorenzo turned to Avery, his lethal demeanor instantly softening. He reached out gently, cupping her round cheek. "Are you all right, Mea Luz?" he asked softly. Avery nodded, a profound sense of awe washing over her. "Yes, thank you. You never have to thank me," he promised. "You are my protector. It is only fitting that I am yours." Weeks slowly dissolved into many long months at the heavily fortified stone estate. Lorenzo recovered. His muscles rebuilt into cords of power, and the pale, comatose complexion became a healthy olive tone, kissed by the sun. Avery remained firmly by his side, but her responsibilities had drastically evolved. She was no longer simply a private caregiver. She became his most trusted advisor. During syndicate meetings, she sat quietly. She possessed a terrifyingly sharp mind. She routinely caught discrepancies in financial ledgers or noticed nervous tics Lorenzo missed. The syndicate quickly respected her. Crossing the softly spoken nurse meant signing their death warrants. Despite their growing intimacy, shadows of danger constantly loomed over them. The hospital assassin was a symptom of a larger disease, a mole still operating freely inside their expanding organization. Crisis arrived on a suffocatingly hot Tuesday afternoon. Lorenzo required a routine intravenous vitamin infusion. It was a recovery protocol established by an outside concierge physician recommended by the Lucchese crime family as a gesture of goodwill. The doctor had personally delivered the sealed plastic medical bags that morning. Avery stood quietly inside Lorenzo's mahogany-paneled study, preparing the medical line. Lorenzo sat behind his massive desk, casually reviewing shipping manifests. He glanced up, admiring how the custom-tailored black dress hugged Avery's curves. As she pierced the plastic port with the IV spike, she froze. The liquid caught the harsh glare of the desk lamp. Standard vitamin complexes were clear or slightly yellow. This fluid contained microscopic crystalline flakes, drifting silently like snow. Her nursing instincts flared into absolute panic. She knew this specific chemical reaction. It occurred when potassium chloride was heavily concentrated in a cold saline solution. If administered directly into a patient's veins, it would trigger instantaneous cardiac arrest. It would perfectly mimic a fatal heart attack resulting from his past traumas. "Lorenzo," Avery murmured, her voice sounding unnaturally calm as she aggressively clamped the plastic tubing. He set down his pen, dark eyes narrowing. "Yes, my love. Who exactly delivered this specific IV bag today?" she asked, hands trembling slightly, as she carefully placed the lethal mixture onto a sterile metal tray. Dr. Aris, the physician recommended by the Lucchese emissary. Lorenzo replied, his posture straightening as he sensed a sudden shift in her energy. Why do you ask? Because if I attach this line to your arm, you will be dead in under 2 minutes, Avery stated, turning around to face him completely. This bag is loaded with a lethal, concentrated dose of unmixed potassium. Silence slammed into the room. Lorenzo stared blankly at the innocent-looking bag, then slowly looked at Avery. The chilling reality of his fatal experience washed over his mind, immediately followed by an explosive, volcanic rage. "Carmine!" Lorenzo roared. The furious sound violently shook the heavy glass windows. The wooden door instantly flew open. Carmine and Dante stormed inside with weapons raised. "Fine, Doctor," Aris Lorenzo commanded, voice vibrating with pure malice. "Lock down this entire compound. Bring the Lucchese emissaries down to the soundproof basement. Now." The following 3 hours were a chaotic blur of swift, brutal Mafia justice. Avery purposely locked herself inside her suite, choosing to ignore the muffled screams echoing from the subterranean levels. Lorenzo purged the traitors from his inner circle, with ruthless efficiency, sending severed fingers back to the Lucchese patriarch as a bloody warning. When the violent storm finally passed, Lorenzo quietly entered his private bedroom. He looked thoroughly exhausted. Dark blood splattered his crisp white dress shirt. He found Avery sitting patiently on the edge of his mattress, holding a warm, wet washcloth over a small basin of soapy water. He stopped near the doorway, staring intently at her soft face. She did not flinch away from the gore or the fresh darkness swirling in his eyes. She merely patted the empty space beside her. Lorenzo slowly walked forward and collapsed onto the soft bed. Avery tenderly began washing his large hands, scrubbing away the sins of his violent underworld, with the exact same gentle devotion she had shown in room 402. "I am a terrible monster, Avery," he whispered, staring downward at his dripping fingers. "I bring only death. You bring pure life. You are entirely too good for my dark world." "I am just a fat, stubborn nurse who knows how to spot dangerous medication," Avery corrected softly, gently, cupping his sharp jawline. "You made me feel truly visible. You are my heartbeat, Lorenzo." He exhaled a ragged breath, pulling her heavy body down into his lap. He desperately craved her solid warmth. He kissed her fiercely. "Marry me," Lorenzo demanded against her lips. "Rule this massive empire beside me. Let me worship you forever." Avery smiled. "Only if I choose the charity." Lorenzo laughed deeply again. Wow, what a thrilling journey of survival, loyalty, and unexpected romance. Avery proved that true strength and beauty come from within, and Lorenzo learned that a real queen protects her king. Did you expect that shocking poison twist at the end? Let us know your favorite part of their story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this gripping Mafia romance drama, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more amazing real-life stories.